Hey everyone, going live with Topher Field, who is a libertarian political commentator. I'm going to get Topher on in just a second. And we'll be discussing all the questions that you guys have sent through. So if you guys don't have the time to watch this all the way through, don't stress. I'll save it to an IGTV. All right, so Topher, that should work. Hey everyone. What do I do here? There we go. It worked.
How are you, Carly?
Hey, so guys, Topher is actually new to IG, so here we are. We are blowing his IG up with our lives.
Can you believe there are people in this day and age who still have only just made an Instagram account less than a week ago?
I think it's fantastic. Can I just say, I think it's the fact that you've resisted until 2021, given current climates. So before we go into things, I know there's going to be a lot of Americans jumping on. So I can see already someone from California. Hey, just so our American friends understand Australian politics, because that's mostly what we're going to be discussing. I think it's important to sort of explain what a liberal means in Australia, because I know that's a source of confusion. So can you just break that down really quickly?
Okay, it's ridiculously confusing. In Australia, our Liberal Party is supposedly our more conservative party, and it is more conservative than our other major parties. It's kind of our Republican equivalent, even though it's called Liberal. In reality, they are actually very progressive, very left-leaning, but we just don't have anyone more conservative than them of the major parties. We've got some really fantastic minor parties. So our Liberal Party is our more conservative party. Our Labor Party is supposedly our more left-leaning socialist type of party. I don't think there's a big difference between them. So typically, in order for what I say to translate internationally, I tend to say conservative and progressive.
Yeah.
Rather than left and right, rather than Liberal, Labor, Democrat, Republican, all of those tend to mean different things depending on where you go. I tend to say conservative and progressive because most of the time they tend to mean the same thing no matter where you go.
Yeah, absolutely. So I just thought that was important to clear up for our American mates, because I think a lot of them get confused when I say I grew up in a liberal household. They're like, wait, what? That doesn't make sense. So, and for the sake of I'm sure this will be one of many chats that we have on IG Live, because there's so much to talk about. And given that we're both in lockdown and, well, half of Australia is in lockdown, there's a lot of time to discuss these heavy-hitting issues, particularly with politics. And so, guys, for perspective, Topher is a libertarian political commentator. He's been doing this for a long, long time. No current ties to any political party?
No.
No, just someone who's actively interested, has, participated in that political landscape for a long time.
Yeah, yeah.
And for context, I am someone who has grown up in a very liberal, conservative household. We always voted Liberal. And for the most part, I just followed suit in what my parents told me to vote for. And as now a millennial, I kind of had a foot in both camps. You know, I'm fiscally conservative, I'm old school traditional values, but I'm also socially conscious. And one of the biggest contentious issues I see millennials facing, people who are, starting to have their families, are starting to progress along in their career, is that we don't identify with any of these major parties anymore.
Yeah. 100%.
Yeah. So you're traditional liberal, very conservative, would I be right in saying quite religious fundamentally, very Christian leaning?
Not anymore. Probably more likely to be Christian leaning than, let's say, the Labor Party and certainly the Greens, which has tended to be a much more secular party. I was personally raised Christian conservative. That was my background, and we were a liberal voting household. So I'd say there was probably a little bit of a correlation there. But by and large, in Australia, the Conservative Party was founded by a bloke by the name of Robert Menzies. And if you read the speech that he gave when he founded the party, it sounds fantastic. You read what he said, and what he does is he lays out what they're about, what they are for, and who they oppose. And at the time, they were opposing the socialists, or actually the outright communists, is who he was really speaking out against. And he breaks down in detail what they're opposed to in terms of all the government welfare and rewarding people who aren't working, and centralising power further up into government, etc. And I spoke at a Victorian Liberal Party branch meeting, so that's our Conservative Party branch meeting some years ago. I was invited to speak and I said to the guy, "You're not going to like what I have to say." And he said, No, I will like what you have to say. The others at the branch meeting, the other members of the party may not, but I'll like it. So I said, fine. So I had free rein to say what I wanted. So I stood up and I read that speech by Robert Menzies the day that he founded the modern Liberal Party as we know it, our Conservative Party as we know it. And I then simply said to the group, I said, if you were to read the policies of the Liberal Party today, would you think that you were reading the policies of the party that Robert Menzies founded or the party that Robert Menzies opposed? And then I sat down. Because the truth is, today, the modern Conservative Party has become everything that Robert Menzies was opposed to when he created it.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's where a lot of confusion sits for the average Australian voter. And I would throw myself in that category. You know, I don't really think much about, well, prior to the pandemic, I didn't place a lot of value on involving myself politically because for the most part, things in Australia have been really good for a really long time. And we seem to flip-flop between Liberal, Labor, you know, and for the most part, there's been no real reason to be actively across what each party stands for, what they're representing. But given the heavy politicization of this health crisis, a lot of things have come to the surface, and a lot of us are sitting here going, hang on a minute, whoa, this is not what I voted for, this is not what I want, this is not what I stand for. And the issue being with the Westminster system that we follow, we have 4-year terms. So
3 and 4, depending on state and federal, it can be 3, it can be 4, but around about there,
Yeah, so, you know, we are looking at our choices in hindsight at the moment going, no, I didn't think this was where we were going. So
yeah, but can I jump in, because Incubationist has made a great comment here, 2 wings of the same bird. They are. The difference between Liberal and Labor, or our Conservative and Progressive parties, they may as well be 2 different wings of the same party. And so I think this is no longer about, oh, I voted for the Conservative Party, I should have voted for the Progressive Party, or vice versa. The problem is that we're voting for those parties at all. Yeah,
absolutely. And we'll get into some of these questions we have in a second. But, you know, the interesting thing about where we are at the moment is we're being scolded and chastised by our government as if we're uneducated and we're children, basically. I mean, for those of you who watched the press conference today, it was a long one. I was just sitting here going, am I being told off by my dad? I feel like I'm 6 years old again. Do you know what I mean? And there seems to be this narrative that our politicians are all knowing, the most educated, the most wise of our citizens. And it's very much not the case.
Not at all.
And
there's been this inversion in the relationship. So the Westminster system that you mentioned a moment ago is based on the idea that the government is the servant. Even under the English Westminster system, where we still have the Crown, we still have the King or the Queen, they don't actually have political power. They can't make the rules. And in fact, they are bound by the rules that get made. They can't go out and murder somebody. They can't levy their own taxes. They can't steal. All the things that kings used to be able to do and get away with, under the Westminster system, that's no longer the case. Everyone is bound by law. There is the rule of law. That's how it's supposed to be. And further to that, we have this kind of Christian ethos built into that the government is the servant of the people and not the master.
Yes.
But this has been flipped completely on its head, and never has it been as clear as it is now. And you're not alone. There's a lot of people that, for very good and sensible reasons, have ignored politics up until now, where you've gotten this far in life thinking, you know what, politics doesn't really affect me. I ignore them. They ignore me. I just get on with my life. And there's a certain logic to that. I'm not going to criticize anyone for making that decision. But what everyone is seeing now is that politics does not leave you alone.
Yes.
You can ignore it all you want. It will never leave you alone. You might have relative peace for a little while, but politics and politicians will never leave you alone. And now they've flipped that relationship and they have put themselves in the driving seat. They are the master. We are the servant, or as you put it, the child in the relationship. We are the dependent. And just all the language around, we're going to give you some of your freedoms back. Well, if it can be taken and given, then it's not a freedom.
Yeah.
A freedom is something that's fundamental. It is ours. It's not there for someone else to take and to play with. So the very fact that they're taking these things away and giving them back means that we don't have any freedoms. All we have are permissions from our government that has assumed a position of authority over us that it was never supposed to have.
Absolutely. And I think that's becoming more and more prevalent. And as people are getting really disenfranchised with what's going on, you know, we've been in this pandemic now for 18 months. Different people are at different stages of frustration. You know, I've been very clear about where I stand with small business and how much it's impacted me and my clients. And we were kind of the first to feel it. Now we're starting to see it really impinge on parents with young children, given that they've missed out on a huge amount of their schooling. They can't go to playgrounds, they can't socialize. We definitely see it, and you're a parent, you're seeing that manifest. And we're also now seeing it from people who can't get healthcare for things like, you know, their chemo or preventative healthcare, and that's starting to impinge. And, you know, the flip-flopping between border control and LGAs, and, you know, each state's handling it differently, but not. You know, everyone is having some kind of effect on their life at the moment.
What's really interesting to me is that this is now finally starting to bite. Even average people who initially, let's be honest, were supportive of all of this. They bought into the hype, the hysteria. It was never, I'm a numbers guy. I love getting into data and getting into numbers and really understanding what's going on. And even for me, in March of 2020, I could very clearly see, based on the data that was coming out of the outstanding work of Professor John Ioannidis, amongst many others, Jay Bhattacharya, and these are highly credentialed epidemiologists and doctors and genuine experts. I'm not an expert. I'm not going to tell you what my opinion is, but I go out and I look and I try and figure out what are the different experts saying. And there were these experts coming out with really compelling data. Now, understand, all of the disaster scenarios were based on models. We had the Imperial College, and Neil Ferguson was the man responsible for that. He's a serial alarmist. He's made multiple reports over the decades of, oh, SARS is going to destroy mankind and mad cow's disease is going to kill millions of people. And he's been wrong every single time, but yet he still is in his position. He's still building these models. He's the one that released a model that scared the UK government into locking down. Initially, they were trying to stay open. They were going to take more of a path like what Sweden took. And it was his model that scared them into shutting down. I'm not a models guy. I'm a data guy. And only about 2 weeks after his model came out, we started to get some really good data. And that data made it very, very clear from the very beginning that whilst COVID-19 is definitely real, let's dismiss the conspiracy nonsense. There's something out there that is affecting people. This hasn't been an ordinary flu season. It's certainly been a bad one. It's not anywhere near on the apocalyptic scale that the models claimed it was going to be. And that should have informed our response from that point on. However, the media stuck with the models rather than data. That scared the public, and that meant that all the lockdowns and everything in Australia were very popular early on. What's just happened with the most recent opinion poll is support for the lockdowns in Victoria has dropped below 50% for the first time. Dropped from 56% to 44% in a 2-week period of time. And I reckon that's because of the playground lockdown. I think Daniel Andrews overbaked the cake and got himself burned, because he just pushed that little bit too far for that little bit too long. And now there's just a lot of people starting to get fed up with the whole thing.
Can we just touch on that very quickly? I mean, I don't have children, but obviously a lot of my friends do. And that one thing, you know, on a scale of the destruction I have seen, in my point of view, and like I said, I don't have children, but my point of view is like, of everything that's unfolding, I thought that to be a small issue. However, it really is that straw that broke the camel's back. To see that last little bit of freedom, that last little bit of joy zapped from people's life. The retaliation against the government was fantastic to see. I was like, it took this to get you guys to react. And, you know, whether it's people like yourself or Emily from Voice for Victoria or Emily from Discernible, these guys are really great at giving us the play-by-play of what's going on. And they all called it. They were like, when there's enough when there's enough pressure from the public politically and it starts affecting polls, that's when they'll flip-flop. We've seen that today. We didn't get our freedoms back, but you got the playgrounds back because that's what you actively campaigned for.
Our freedoms. Sorry, I'm putting those in funny quotes, because clearly they're not freedoms anymore, are they? Absolutely. This poll comes out and says, oh, sorry, Daniel Andrews, you've slipped below 50% popularity for all your lockdowns. What does he do? The very next day, he announces, oh, actually, we're going to open the playgrounds on Friday. Okay. Has the science changed? All the way through, they've been saying this is based on the science. Has the science changed? No, it hasn't. Nothing new scientifically has come out in that period of time. There is no other justification. What this is an admission, without, of course, him wanting to admit it, that it was all based on the politics in the first place, and now his reaction is a political one as well.
Absolutely. So that's something I kind of want to go into, because there's a lot of narrative. Like at the moment, people are split. You're either in camp anti, I don't want to say the word, but anti the, you know, the thing in your arm. Or you're
being juiced, I believe, is what some people are calling
like,
it to avoid
so we don't want to get deplatformed, guys. So we're going to steer away from that particular conversation. But you know, so you're either anti that, or you're a COVID denier, or you're a conspiracy theorist. That's camp one. Camp two is you're you care about your fellow countrymen, you're pro lockdown, you're pro Daniel Andrews, and you're on board with the COVID hysteria.
The whole program. Yeah.
There is, I mean, obviously there's grey area, but that grey area is completely suppressed and silenced right now. You are not allowed to have that simple, logical discussion about what's going on. You're extreme, and I've experienced that firsthand. You know, just 5 weeks ago, as soon as it came out that I was anti the government's narrative, wowee, did they come for me? And one thing that I was very clear from, as much as, you know, I was kind of like, fuck. I sat back and I looked at, I'm being made an example of here, of someone that is having a common sense discussion that got traction and then was deliberately cut down and smeared because that was disrupting the government narrative. And so, like, when I pull the emotion out of my situation for a second, you see that this is not about health. It has not been about health. It is about politics. Because if it was about health, my mental health would have been something that people cared about.
Would have mattered.
Health of children would have been something people cared about. It wasn't. It was political. And so, with where we're at the moment, I think the average person, like if we were to do a poll or like, you know, a bit of a focus group, you would find that most people do really live this common sense approach. However, we are being indoctrinated and polarized purely by this political grandstanding. And those who feel it to be wrong are now almost getting radicalized. And I think that's where I'm starting to see the biggest cracks and the issues show, because I am not a radical at all. I'm not in the conspiracy camp. I do love this quote though. The difference between a conspiracy theory and a fact is about 6 months. I think that's kind of funny. Because
or the other one I love is we should stop calling them conspiracy theories. We should rename them spoiler alerts.
And you know, the thing is, because if we were to talk about this pandemic 5 years ago and tell everyone what's going to happen, everyone would think you're fucking nuts. And we're here. And you know, whereas you're quite interested with politics, I am the biggest nerd with history. I love history. And so, and my whole family does. So when it comes to the world wars, anything about dictators, that is like a conversation my family has been having for decades. So much so that you know, you ask me anything on Stalin, I don't want to say Hitler because he's an obvious one, but, you know, go back as far as Genghis Khan. The tyranny playbook is pretty simple, and it's been played out basically as long as civilization has existed. This current narrative of the government and people voting in their leaders is kind of a new thing. We've had parliament for centuries, but this kind of thing where we feel like we actually have control of what we vote for is fairly new, would you say, in the last century and a half?
Look, it has existed in other expressions. You look at Greek and Roman history, and certain forms of voting have existed, but the who can vote has always been very restricted, and the rights that they have and the amount of power that the government has always been quite different. It's certainly not been practiced in the form that we have, and this concept of a servant government is a relatively new concept without question. So certainly within the last few centuries is the first time in history that we've seen it expressed the way that it is now.
Okay. So I guess the interesting conversation that keeps coming up is with this radicalization of, you know, it's all coming to head from the pandemic, but I feel like we've been going down this road for a long time. It's just taken the pandemic to sort of exacerbate what's going on. There seems to be this massive shift in the narrative right now about you're only a good person if you get in line. If you don't get in line, you're a terrible human being. And we're seeing that with mandates and the disparaging comments that our premiers put on us and things like that. And one of the interesting arguments, because I'm jumping all over the place, but I've got some really good questions in here. So I just want to give context before we get into the meat and the bones. But the biggest argument people on the pro side are coming at is, unless you're educated, unless you're an academic who has got years and years in books, you're an epidemiologist, you're a doctor, you do not get to speak. And my frustration with that is, and I did a little speech on this yesterday, is that years in books does not equal life experience, and there has to be a rationale between the two. You can be a professional academic but have absolutely no understanding of real world. We're seeing that play out with these rules and regulations in regards to small business. You know, Martin Foley gets up and discusses small business. It's very clear he's never worked a day in his life in a business. So I want to dismantle that narrative really quickly before we get into things about how our leaders are somewhat more intelligent, more educated, and therefore more inclined to be able to know what the right thing to do is, because we're looking to them to make our decisions. And we're in this weird society now where we outsource all of our independent thought to someone who we deem to be superior to us.
So there's two huge problems with the experts as it is practiced in COVID. Number one, an expert, someone who's devoted their life to genuinely wrapping their brain around some detailed, complex issue, is of necessity going to be lacking in other areas. No one can be an expert in everything. No one can have every possible life experience. Life is too big. Knowledge is too big. It's just not possible. So the better someone, there's a saying about higher education. As you go through diplomas and up into degrees, and then eventually you become a doctor, what you do is you learn more and more and more about less and less and less until eventually you know absolutely everything about absolutely nothing, right? That's the kind of the academic pathway. And so we take these people who have become academically successful. They know absolutely everything about an incredibly narrow subject. Now, take someone like a Brett Sutton, supposedly, and I'll deal with the fact that actually he's not in a moment, but supposedly he's meant to be the expert on the epidemiology and the medical side of things, right? That doesn't mean he understands a rat's about mental health, because infectious diseases and mental health are two entirely separate disciplines. Doesn't mean he knows a single thing about economics and the health implications of disrupting people's economic lives. Again, it's another health discipline, but it's completely separate to epidemiology, which he's not even an expert in to begin with, let alone all of the other sociological implications, child development implications, etc. This is why we have politicians, right? Their job is to be the generalist that takes the advice from all of the different specialists and experts, where they know what they're talking about in a narrow area, and it is the politician's job to turn that advice into a policy that balances the advice and the expertise across all the areas. And that's where, when someone like Daniel Andrews turns around and says, I'm just following the experts, what he's actually saying is, I'm not doing my job. Instead of taking their advice and considering its implications in all areas and coming up with a good balanced policy, I'm just doing what I'm told by someone who by definition is unbalanced. They by definition do not understand these other areas. That's problem number one. Problem number two, and we see this really clearly with COVID, we have different experts saying different things. Now, I'm not qualified to figure out who's who. The best that I can do is have a look at who's actually using the data better and who's manipulating the data more, and try and figure out which one might actually be closer to the data. That's about the best that the layperson can do. However, when someone like a politician says, I'm listening to the experts, the question that you have to ask yourself first before anything else is, who picked that expert? When Daniel Andrews says, I'm following the experts, what he's actually saying is, I'm following the hand-picked person that I selected to be my expert. So it's not actually the expert that matters. It's his ability to pick the right person that matters. And how do we know that there was any, what were the criteria that went into his selection? He has to be a public health bureaucrat. To what degree is he just a bureaucrat? And to what degree does he really understand public health? The most qualified epidemiologist in the world will never get that job. You know why? They don't have the bureaucratic experience. They're going to select a public health bureaucrat. And so to what degree is this man just a bureaucrat? Well, actually, if you look at his career, he's almost entirely a bureaucrat. Even when he was working in health, he was in the back office. He's been a paper pusher all his life. And this is the man who is now held up as the expert, handpicked by Daniel Andrews for reasons that I think have become very, very obvious.
And the alarming thing is that it seems to be these unelected bureaucrats who are dictating what happens to us. You know, that we didn't vote in Brett Sutton. We voted in Daniel Andrews. I mean, I didn't, but, you know, so when we say...
But as a public, we did.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we say we're listening to the health experts, it's like, well, hang on a minute. Do we get a say on who we're cherry picking to be our health expert now? No, we don't. And that's dangerous because, you know, if we've learned anything about human behavior over however long we've been on this planet, it's that we are very corruptible. We are very biased. And bias shows when money's involved, you know, and not to go down that conspiracy path, but it's very clear that if you are on board the Daniel Andrews train, you are well and truly financially looked after. If you're not,
they've got plenty of money. They've got plenty of money to splash around. Now, it's our money, of course. It's taxpayers' money that they're splashing around. But for example, for the last nearly 10 years now, the Victorian state government has spent over $300 million a year on advertising. Now, they claim that this is public awareness campaigns, things like the COVID vaccination. Oh, there you go. I said the word. Oops, I've just triggered the censors. You know, all the ads saying that you should go and do that, which of course you should, censors. Yes, absolutely. That's what this video is all about. All of that's being paid for with our taxpayers' money. Now they're putting ads into every single newspaper. They're running ads on every single channel. They're doing a bunch of things on Facebook and Twitter and everything else. Because they're spending so much money, when they turn around to someone like Facebook and say, hey, we're not happy with this disinformation, we're going to pull our ads off your platform if you don't deal with that. What happens? You know, same with the media. When you've got a producer sitting there who's high enough in the company, an EP of news who's high enough in the company that he's involved in the conversations around advertiser revenue and ratings and all that sort of stuff, and he's got a young up-and-coming story producer who wants to run a story that might contradict the narrative and might upset the people that are paying a couple of $100 million a year in advertising revenue into the media, which side is that EP going to take? So
absolutely.
I don't think there's necessarily some conspiracy in the sense of a centralized kind of puppet master who's pulling all of the strings. I think what we have is multiple layers of a combination of incompetence, self-interest, perverse incentives and self-interest, and these really negative feedback loops that we've created in the way that modern politics, and I don't want to go too much into political theory, so I might leave that there. But I think it's a combination of perverse incentives, human arrogance and ignorance.
Absolutely. And just on that, you know, I've just felt the full weight of how this political machine does work, given that, you know, the success of that video I put out, you know, I think it reached 40 million people, which, you know, you can't pay for that kind of exposure. If you went to an advertising agency and said, hey, we want this to get 40 million views, you'd be lucky to get a million. I think that virality speaks volumes for how much someone was just desperate for someone to say something commonsensical. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And sorry.
You're absolutely right, but I'd add to that as well. The mainstream media are currently terrified of people like you and me. They're absolutely terrified of the fact that, you know, you're 40 million. There isn't a television show in Australia that has reached 40 million people. It's never happened.
No.
Why? Because they're restricted in their geographical area of who they can broadcast to, etc. I haven't had any videos go nearly to that level, but I've had plenty of my videos be watched by more people than your average primetime television show.
Yeah.
I've had videos get out to more people than a current affair gets to, than 60 Minutes gets to. And they are sitting there watching their advertising revenue diminishing and watching people like us doing a better job, getting deeper into issues and being better connected with the community that we're speaking to. And they are freaking terrified because they don't know how to respond. So when they get the chance to attack somebody like you, they take it.
Absolutely. And I think the libertarian and the rise of the libertarian right now is actually the biggest threat to what's going on, because we aren't easily swayed politically, and we're not buying into this indoctrination that's going on. And, you know, as you said before, you know, left or right, both sides of the same bird, or, you know, both wings of the same bird. The issue is you and I are different birds, and we're uncontrollable. And so when you see something like my video, which was commonsensical, and, you know, just to acknowledge, I did say at that point in time, there wasn't people in ICU. That was true at the time. In hindsight, obviously, that's no longer the case. But when I put it up, there was no way I could have expected it to hit what it did. So when you have someone who's speaking like, you know, just straight common sense and not in all this political bullshit, you know, like I'm not using weird words, you know, I'm not talking around issues. I just went straight for the jugular. that hit a nerve with people. And the people who were feeling like they hadn't been heard were like, finally, someone said how I feel and think.
Yeah.
And then, you know, the repercussions on the side of that is if you speak common sense, you will be censored, you will be shut down. We're seeing it everywhere.
Yeah.
Mostly from the conservative side and those who are sort of erring more to the right. We are being censored, we're being deplatformed, you know, we've got fact checkers and things like that. And I deliberately stay away from anything contentious because if I'm really honest, I don't know enough about those issues. I would only be, I think we talked about this off air, I would only be sort of parroting what I had heard.
Repeating what someone else has said, rather than actually adding value to the conversation.
Yeah. And which is why I don't bring up those issues because like I'm just wasting space. But what I can speak of is small business. I have many years experience of it, good and terrible. I have been in the thick of it. And so when you put up common sense, it's sidelined. And that's the bit that I'm really struggling to understand because at the end of the day, the vast majority of the public are responsible for voting these leaders in. Wouldn't you think it would be in their best interest to make sure the silent majority is sympathizing with you? But instead, we're radicalizing people. We don't want common ground.
Yeah. And this you brought up this radicalization issue a couple of times, and I want to respond to it because I think this is one of the greatest concerns that I have in all of this. When you keep calling somebody a certain thing, and no matter what they do, you keep labeling them with that thing, you remove any incentive for them to want to reach out to you, and you remove any barrier to them becoming that thing, right? If you're going to treat somebody as though they are an X and push them into that corner, it doesn't matter whether they're not in that corner themselves yet. Eventually, they're actually just going to go, well, screw it. I'll just go and become the thing, you know. It's a throwaway line that I use sometimes when I find myself in a situation where I'm in a conversation with multiple people all trying to tell me off. I found myself in a really weird, surreal conversation where essentially it was that sort of SJW thing where because I was white, male, conservative, Christian, and still identified with my birth sexuality and straight, I was basically the devil, right? I was basically Satan personified. And I very quickly cottoned on that these people were not interested in a conversation. They were interested in berating me and advertising their moral superiority. So my answers, I just started to take the piss, right? I stopped actually trying to address them or anything like that. You know, they accuse me of hating somebody or other. I'm like, oh, no, but I don't just hate them. I hate everybody. I'm an equal opportunity hater. I just hate everybody's guts. Like I just started coming out with this sort of stuff. And they started to then react to that. And I sort of surprised myself. I looked at one of them in the eye, and I think this might be a line out of a movie that just popped into my head. Or so, I don't know where I got it from, but I'm sure it was from someone else. But I just looked at her and I said, hey, you're the one that cast me as the devil. Don't get mad if it turns out that I'm good at it.
Yeah, I love that. And it's true. It's true.
Sorry, this is what we're doing. We are casting people as the devil, and we're removing any incentive for them to not behave like the devil.
And it's really funny you say that, Topher, because that's kind of something that clicked for me a couple of weeks ago. So on the flip side of the backlash that happened with me and watching everyone who disagreed with me paint me as a certain picture of, you know, the devil and all this sort of stuff, I was like, if that's what you want me to be, fucking I'll do it. You know what I mean? Like if that's the card you want to deal me, I will show up at that and I will do it.
Yeah, and I will be better at it than you at stopping me. And that's kind of the terrifying thing.
Yeah, and oddly, you know, I want to be careful not to go down the SJW route because we could talk on that for hours. But for a group of people that are so opposed to labeling, they seem to be really good at micro-labeling themselves and pigeonholing them in every different possible category. And so when a label got slapped on me, I was like, if that's the label you're going to give me, I will run with it. Because now I identify as a political devil. I'm cool with that.
Yeah. And this was a mistake made in the US election, the 2016 election that Hillary Clinton lost against Donald Trump. She labeled Trump supporters as deplorable. And they went, okay, thank you very much. Now we have an identity that we can rally around. It's the same thing happening in Australian politics. And the polarization is a huge problem, not allowing other people to actually change their minds and to change their views. And this is something I try and talk about a fair bit. as much as it pains me sometimes because of the amount of damage done with all the COVID laws and restrictions and everything else, there's the sense, the natural human sense to want revenge on people.
Yeah.
And that can stop you from wanting to allow other people to change. And you have to keep that in check, and you have to go, no, you were wrong. You've acknowledged that you were wrong, and you're coming around to being less wrong, or to being right. So actually, in order for us to be able to move on, we need to welcome you with open arms. We need to actually give you room to have been wrong and to change your mind. And there's no grace in politics anymore. There's no allowance for people to change their minds. There are two camps. There is nothing in between. And if you are not fully in this camp, they are trained to see you as fully in that camp, and vice versa. And there is no room allowed for any kind of grey.
And I want to go into that because we're seeing that now, and you know, both sides are guilty of it. So if you are in the anti-COVID denier conspiracy group, because as you said, there's two sides. If you're in that group, you're just as hostile and aggressive to the others, and vice versa. So, you know, we've got terms like sheeple, Dan bots, I stand with Dan crowds, you know, whatever. And then you have on the flip side,
bootlicker. Yeah.
And then on the flip side, you've got anti-vax, COVID denier, tinfoil hat wearers, you know. It's about sledging. There's never any actual discourse or nuance to that conversation. It's just insults. And I think, you know, if we learn anything in kindergarten, it's that if you don't have an argument, you resort to insults because that's all you've got. So, you know, you just have to go and look through any Facebook or Instagram or whatever TikTok comment thread and just see people just mudslinging. And, you know, one thing that I have learned over the years, particularly in small business, if you want to be a pig, roll in the mud. If you don't want to be a pig, don't step into the pen. Yeah. Every now and then, being human, I have stepped into the pen and I instantly regret it.
Had a good roll in the mud from time to time.
Oh, and look, you know, I'm the first one to say that it's more so when people come at me. I very rarely will step into that pen just because. But, you know, you get unsolicited DMs, unsolicited comments of people telling you you're wrong, you're an idiot, you're this, you're that. And get me on a bad day, I will tell you to fuck off. As has been
guilty as charged. Yeah.
You know, like, and people will screenshot it and go, oh, look, she's told me to fuck off. I'm like, you got me on a bad day. But for the most part, if you come into my DMs, if you're on my comment thread and you're not attacking me, I will absolutely engage with you in a really good conversation because I'm not all in that camp. I'm definitely sort of looking at both right now going, I don't know where I sit. Yeah. Win me over.
Well, let me give you an example, because I would consider myself to be someone who I certainly hope that I am, and each viewer can be the judge of whether I am. I try to be data driven. I try to actually get past the headlines, past the noise, past the posturing and the agendas, and try and actually go, who's got data? Which one of you has data that actually agrees with your claims? And where that has led me to now is this position here. COVID-19 is real. And it is reasonably serious for people who are elderly and already unwell. It is a life ender. If people are already towards the end of their life and already unwell, it is a life ender. And that can't be taken flippantly. We can't just go, oh, well, they were already old. Doesn't matter. That's not an appropriate human response, okay? However, we also know that it is almost nothing for people under the age of, say, 18 who are completely healthy. And then there's a sliding scale in between that really ramps up. I mean, it's still almost nothing for people in their 40s. And then above 50, I lost a 50-year-old friend, a very healthy 50-year-old, to COVID. And I would say that he was actually one of the examples of someone who really genuinely died of COVID, not just with COVID. He's an Indonesian man, would have absolutely destroyed me in a street fight, fighting fit, went to the gym all the time, no known health conditions, contracted COVID, ended up on a ventilator because of the way that they do their healthcare in Bali, and passed away. Left behind a wife and 2 kids, a long-time family friend. So I am not sitting here saying it isn't real, and I'm not sitting here saying that it isn't capable of killing people. It very clearly is. The data tells us very clearly that it is a low-level risk for most demographics, extremely low-level risk as you get younger, and then all of a sudden it really ramps up in its risk for elderly people. And we need to be compassionate enough and human enough to assess that and say, well, how do we respond? And my what I've been saying since March of 2020, since the data came out that really characterized this virus and showed us what it was. We need to protect the vulnerable. That's the elderly, people with comorbidities, people in nursing homes, people already in palliative care are extremely vulnerable. And we as a society ought to take measures to try and keep this away from them. However, we need to let everybody else get on with life because it's not a risk to the vast majority of other people. Had that approach been taken, a whole lot of other things would never have happened. But let me now move through where I kind of sit purely on data. And I know we said we wouldn't do this, but I'm doing it anyway. I have personally not taken any of the coronavirus vaccines. Now, I've only recently actually been allowed to take it in Australia anyway. They've only recently kind of opened it up to people in my age and health bracket. I've not taken one. Purely because long-term health data, and by that I mean anything above, let's say, 3 years, is simply non-existent. For good reason. They didn't exist 3 years ago, right? It's not a conspiracy. It's not a whatever. We didn't have them, so we don't know what happens after a couple of years. And the simple fact is, you don't have to look very far back into history to see examples of medications and even vaccines that were safe for the first couple of years. And then we went, oh, hang on. There's something, and thalidomide is kind of the poster child of that.
I was about to bring up thalidomide,
but there's plenty of other examples. So to me, there is no data, therefore I can't make an assessment. So I'm not going to put that into my body yet. Once that data comes out, I may very well turn around and go, you know what? Hit me up. I'm happy to take it, okay? That's the data-driven approach. I'm not sitting here saying, I'm never going to take it, and I'm not sitting here saying, I don't care that there's no data, give it to me. I'm simply sitting here going, once there's data, I will make an informed decision. But until there's data, you cannot make an informed decision. It's not possible.
And I want to touch on that too, because I'm in the same camp as you. This whole anti-this, whatever, I'm not anti anything. I am fully up to date with all my inoculations that prior to COVID we were meant to have. And I think they're a great thing. That I'm not anti that. I have got in my family histories of DVTs and blood clots. And so that's something that for me, when I see that, I'm like, that it makes me feel uneasy. And when it comes to the rollout of this, I have said from the day one, if you feel that you need that to feel safe, absolutely go for it. And I don't think anything less for anyone that does it or doesn't do it. I don't go and ask you.
It's your own decision.
I don't go and ask you if you've had your prostate looked at. I don't expect anyone to ask me when I had my last pap smear. Do you know what I mean?
I was going to bring that up. I was wondering. Well,
I was like, well, are we opening that door now?
Please no. Let's not.
And so this is the thing. I guess this is my burgeoning libertarianness coming out of me. I'm like, I'm all for like the progression of medical science and things like that. Great, fantastic. But please don't tell me based on your decision, I have to do that to my body. A perfect example of this, just to sort of take us away from that particular topic. I don't drink alcohol. I have no issue with other people who drink alcohol. I choose not to drink it.
I sure hope not.
Do you know what I mean? Like, couldn't care less. It's just a personal choice. And I've never had anyone say they won't be my friend because I don't drink alcohol. And I've certainly never said anything to someone who does drink alcohol that I can't be your friend. It's personal preference. So I'm not sure where this division has come up. And everything is so emotionally charged, and I think this comes from this politicization. They're using it as a manipulative tool. If you don't do this, you are then going to be ostracized. And never has segregation fared well in our history.
Listen, for the last however many decades, the last 60, 70 years of human history, we have been actively working to reduce segregation. Okay, we saw the end of apartheid in South Africa. We've seen the end of segregation between blacks and whites in the US. We literally fought a war about this in Europe. When you look at what's happened over the last number of decades, it's been all about more inclusion, more opportunity, making sure that more people can be their authentic selves openly in society and not have to live in fear or live at disadvantage. And all of a sudden, as of 2020, we are reintroducing apartheid into this country. We've lost our way. From a values point of view, we have lost our way completely.
And what I've noticed too is the succession of things that have been introduced over the last 18 months been really incremental so that we don't notice them. If you would have slapped that vaccine mandate on us 18 months ago, there would have been absolute outrage. But because we've been slowly coerced, now it's like, it's just one more thing, just do it. Everyone get in the line, everyone do as we're told. And that's where I start to take issue.
Every time someone like you or I brings up anything resembling the slippery slope argument, we get told off for it. Oh, that's the slippery slope argument. Okay, fine. You can hate on the slippery slope argument if you like. But I think what we are living right now is a pretty clear example of a slippery slope. And I can use the Prime Minister's own words to illustrate this problem. When asked whether he wanted to make the coronavirus vaccines as mandatory as possible, which is a phrase that he did use when he first started talking about them, he said to the journalist, I'm the one responsible. I invented no jab, no play. And that was the rules whereby kids in preschools and childcare centres had to be up to date with their vaccinations in order to be allowed in. So he literally created for the very first time this idea that you can't participate in something that's normal, a normal part of life, unless you've had certain vaccinations. And he said, you can guess from that what my approach is going to be to the COVID vaccines. So it's not me saying the slippery slope argument, it's literally him. Saying, I started with no jab, no play, and now we're going to get to here, and then we're going to get to wherever. Like, he's using the slippery slope argument on himself. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think that's why we're seeing this massive division at the moment, because, you know, there is no, you're not allowed to discuss it. You're not allowed to have any moment to sort of step back and just think for yourself. As I said early on, we've sort of outsourced all of our own independent thought to people who we deem to be far superior and more intelligent than us. And, you know, sort of basically diminishing our own life experience, our own lived experience as well. And this argument about all or nothing really disturbs me, because never in life is life black and white. There are certainly many reasons why someone might choose not to do that, to get the vaccine. And many of them very relevant, very real, very like medically based. But then when you've got this discussion of mandates and you're not a good person unless you do this, and I'm going to go into this in a second, the influencing space and the celebrities, what you start doing is making people see you as different. And that's with the segregation we talk about. You know, for a side that talks so emphatically about inclusivity, they are really good at like absolutely segregating everyone and splitting hairs over the minutiae. So I guess that's something I want to discuss now as well. I mean, we've talked about our politicians, but now more than ever, I mean, obviously we do live in that celebrity culture, and we're moving as well into this influencer space, which, you know, my capitalistic marketing side of me is like, influencer culture makes a lot of sense. And if I had a product, I would absolutely hire influencers for sure, and celebrities. But it's, you know, in my mind, I see that as more so it's audience. It's not coercion. I'm not expecting that if I was to give this drink bottle to you and you were to tell everyone it's the best drink bottle ever, I don't expect everyone to blindly believe that. It's more so you've got a huge audience. Of your audience, maybe someone will go and buy this drink bottle. But when you've got, and particularly in America at the moment, and celebrities and influencers, and I really, it's hard for me to say that word. People who have built a platform on social media now basically encouraging that division. You know, they build these little armies of followers, their minions, who then go and do their bidding for them. So there's one at the moment, and I'm not going to use names because God help me, I don't need another barrage of hate. But there's one younger influencer in particular that is very, very much on the pro-jab pathway, to the point where she is, it's weird. It's weird what she's doing. I find it really bizarre. You know, every single day talking about it. I'm like, who are you to talk about this? Like, mention it once.
Well,
cool.
We know for a fact, and I'm not saying that any specific individual is being paid, but we know for a fact from freely available government documentation that they are paying influencers to promote vaccination. So it's entirely possible, and I don't know, but it's entirely possible that if you're seeing someone who is just really out there, they may well be being paid a retainer or being paid by the post or by certain metrics in terms of audience response to continue promoting this idea. The government is literally spending money on this.
And that's alarming to me because, you know, a really good question that actually came through was talking about the rise of Marxism in Gen Z. We'll go into that in a second, but, you know, when you have these people who, how do I say this? They're financially motivated. You know, if someone were to come to me and say, Carly, I will pay you, I mean, you'd have to pay me a lot, to be honest. I drive a hard bargain. If you told me you'd pay me $500 to push the vaccine, I'd be like, add a couple more zeros and we'll start talking. So I don't know what they're being paid. I've got no idea. But you got to wonder what that figure is to make someone go, you know what? Yeah, I'm going to take this money and then go and preach this and go like evangelistical about it. And anyone who does get really evangelistical about things scares me, to be honest. I'm like, what's your motive here? This is weird. Like, you know, if someone tells me to drink a green juice once, I'm like, yeah, cool, I'll drink a green juice, or I won't drink a green juice. But if you're telling me every day, I'm like, why?
What's really going on here?
Go.
Can I comment on that? Because there are definitely some people being paid, but there's also a lot of people that aren't. And I think it's important to kind of be like, some people actually believe this. So I want to talk about the psychology of that for a second, just to help you and anyone watching maybe understand the other side a little bit better, and this religious kind of sense that you can get from people who are just so pro-vax and so all over everything. They love the lockdowns, they love the restrictions, they love the border closures, they love the vaccination passport, they love the whole lot, right?
Yeah.
There is, so you're familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. This triangle where at the bottom you've got the basic survival requirements, shelter, water, oxygen, all that stuff. And then right at the very top, you've got the pinnacle of your needs, which is self-actualization, all right? And as a general rule, if someone doesn't have one of the fundamental things sorted out, they're not thinking about their purpose in life and their self-actualization. All their energy is going into survival, right?
Yeah.
But then as they get all the survival needs met, they start to think about the things on the next tier and the next tier, and eventually they can get to this self-actualization, self-identity type of thing. Now, often for most people, that top tier is fulfilled by things like religion. For some personality types, it can be not actually successfully, but they can try and fill it with things like money, power, these sorts of things. They can try and fulfill that self-actualization hole in their life, but only once they've kind of got everything else sorted. So when you bring in lockdowns and you're shutting down people's businesses, very different things happen to different groups of people. Take the small group, the small business owning group. They get pushed down the hierarchy of needs. They go from having their basic economic needs, etc., sorted, and they're thinking about other things. They're thinking about their fun, their family, other things like that. Now they're being pushed towards the survival, the bottom end of the pyramid. But for the laptop set or for the welfare set, where their income hasn't been interrupted, they don't move down the pyramid, but actually they're offered this opportunity psychologically. They're offered this opportunity by the government. If you get on board our campaign to save the world and get everyone vaccinated, they can actually move up to self-actualization. There is purpose for them in becoming an evangelist for these government programs, becoming an evangelist for Daniel Andrews. They actually, and this is why they are so married to it. This is why it's so hard to shift them off here. And this is why they can't relate at all to the people that are now struggling at the survival level of the hierarchy of needs. They're sitting there going, I have never felt so important in my life.
Yeah.
I've had my vax and I posted about it and 25 people liked it and 10 other people said that they were going to do it too. I'm part of the solution. And they're operating right up here. And they cannot imagine that anyone is actually now struggling for their very survival when they're riding high.
That's a really good point, and I hadn't looked at it like that before. And it's really interesting because now that you've made that point, I can see that very clearly across social media. You know, we instinctively try to build a tribe around us. That's very fundamental human behavior, and like attracts like. So, you know, we do. Like we can say we don't, but absolutely we are seeking validation and trying to find people who agree with us, and that like, that comment, that DM, like you're amazing, that
endorphin hit.
100%. And it's also it's like it's FMCG, right? Like it's moving. You got to keep filling up the tank. So you know, I might post something today, get 10 likes, and people going, "You're amazing." Well, tomorrow I'm going to do it, but I want 12 likes. And then do it, and that's what we're seeing. And so, you know, with these influencers or, you know, people of influence, celebrities, and celebrities, I think, are different. People of influence, particularly in the social media space, I do believe there's a sense where their identity is tied to the success of their social platform. So
Sure.
if the right choice, when I say right choice, the majority is leaning towards vaccine mandates, lockdowns being a positive, it would make sense for them to jump on board and push that.
Sure.
And I think
there's good money in it.
Right. And I think with celebrities, I think a lot of that comes down to doors would close for you if you don't jump on board. You might lose big contracts, so on and so forth. And I noticed this too with my video. And I thought this was really interesting. And I tried to make this point that it didn't get to 40 million because celebrities shared it. It got to 40 million because the average punter shared it. And the reason the average punter shared it is because it resonated deeply with them. And so it had already clocked up on my personal Instagram close to 2.5 million views. It was then shared on Facebook, Instagram, what's it called? TikTok, and Twitter and whatnot. And then it's been around the world and back again, more travel than I'll ever do in my lifetime. And people are like, oh wow, you know, you've got celebrities sharing it. I'm like, no. They are only sharing it now because the majority seems to support this video. So of a sudden, it was really interesting. Like the day before all the backlash happened, all of a sudden, all these blue check marks started sharing the video. Prior to that point, they had been quiet. Prior to that point, not one of them had got up and spoken about small businesses or spoken about children suffering or spoken about, you know, lockdown fatigue and exhaustion. They were quiet because obviously they're protecting their income. Someone comes along, says a really common sense argument, it gets shared. Oh, we can jump on this because the public or the people seem to support it. And that's why it was so quickly shut down. It makes sense. It makes perfect sense. I mean, from an outside looking in, that's dangerous. The last thing you want is a nobody having an audience bigger than our media counterparts or our politicians.
Correct. There is a sense of gatekeepers, and in the past, before social media, it was very easy for gatekeepers to control who got into their industry. So Hollywood was famous for this, where the producers and the overall prevailing political views held within the studios meant that if you were outspoken on any issue that wasn't on the correct side of that issue, you didn't have a career. You wouldn't even get to start a career, let alone continue one if you already had one. Now, social media has made it a lot harder for the gatekeepers to do what they've always done. That's very frustrating to them. And so that's why we're seeing so much pressure being piled on to the platforms themselves, because they are the new gatekeepers if they choose to be. They are the new gatekeepers. And at the moment, they are quite happy to be the gatekeepers because, as I said early on, they are being paid a small fortune in advertising by the same governments that are then coming to them saying, hey, I need you to censor this, I need you to deplatform that. So it's a very symbiotic relationship that's happening right now between the platforms, the celebrities, the influencers, and the governments themselves, where they all have, and this is the perverse incentive problem that I was talking about before. It's not necessarily a Machiavellian conspiracy with a puppet master controlling people. It's a chain of perverse incentives that ultimately loops around and feeds itself, where the politicians have a perverse incentive to take taxpayers' money and spend it on advertising. The platforms then have a perverse incentive to take the government's money on advertising, but now do what they're told. The influencers have the incentive to take the government's money and keep the platforms happy so that they keep building their audience even bigger. And ultimately, we end up in this chain of perverse incentive that feeds itself. And that's what we're in right now. And that's why it seems like it's just taken off and built so much momentum so quickly. You know, 3 years ago, we weren't having any conversation about people being deplatformed unless they were, you know, genuinely into some pretty nasty stuff, right? They were the people being taken off. Now you're getting taken off for mentioning a legal therapeutic drug. If you mention the wrong one, you get taken off. How have we gone from there to there so fast? Because we have a tight loop of perverse incentives that's feeding back on itself.
Absolutely. And that's something that I've always been very careful of in, you know, when I speak up, whether it's in small business or, you know, now it's a bit more politically, I am very generalized in my discussions, and I do that deliberately because as soon as you start focusing on the micro, you lose people. I think it's really important when it comes to broad discussions to focus on that sort of macro. And now that's not even allowed. You are only allowed, these are the topics you can speak of. Everything else is off limits. You lose your platform. And I know a lot of people wanted me to speak about the V and all that stuff. I can't, guys, because if we do that, then we can't give you guys this kind of information, which I think actually is way more valuable and way more important. And so I wanted to go on to, I was going to just take a quick detour because we could talk for hours, but I thought maybe we'll end with this because I just reading the comments, I can see that there's a lot more conversations we need to have. We are seeing a massive rise, and again, this comes down to the way the social media juggernauts are allowing this information to pass. They're obviously quite left-leaning, so we know that Jack Dorsey from Twitter, who also owns Square, is highly, what's the word? Like, he's Marxist. We know that. We also know Zuckerberg, one of the richest men in the world, is socialist-leaning. And the interesting thing is Jack Dorsey, Mark Zuckerberg, they're quite young. They are millennials. As a millennial myself, I'm 35. I know a lot about past liberalizations and past governments and socialism. I don't understand how someone becomes pro-socialism without life experience. But now what we're seeing is Gen Z, our next generation, the ones, you know, living on TikTok, indoctrinating each other through really biased narratives about stuff that they know, for the most part, most of them know nothing about. Would you say that's because of a lack of conflict in the last, say, 30 years?
The way I characterize it is to say that the Anglosphere, so the whole English-speaking world, and I would even roll into that the wealthier parts of Western Europe as well, we are the spoiled brats of the modern world, right? You think of every sort of American teenage, like a college movie that you've ever watched, right? They've got all the different characters. There's the jock, there's the fat one, there's the funny one, there's the artsy one, and then there's always that snooty up himself trust fund baby. Right? The guy whose dad's got money and power and his whole future is sorted because of connections and trust fund baby. We are the trust fund babies of the modern world. Okay, we on the global stage, we are the arrogant, stuck up, completely clueless, have no idea how the real world actually works, but feeling confident about our future because daddy had money and daddy built all this infrastructure and daddy made us rich. And so therefore our future is assured. Now, that's an incredibly foolish view, but I think that's the best explanation that I can give for who we've become. And unfortunately, just about the only way to break somebody out of that is to give them a good solid kick in the teeth. And, you know, I'm old enough now to have not experienced it necessarily. I mean, I think having been born in Australia in the last 40 years is literally winning the lottery. I mean, you have won the lottery. You've been in one of the most prosperous, safest, low conflict, low disease, low natural disaster places on Earth. But I've been lucky enough that I've been to places like China and I've been to Venezuela in 2015 and I've seen exactly what socialism looks like on the ground, what the reality facing the people there actually is. I've seen grown men in suits dumpster diving, looking for scraps of food as they make their way home from their job. It's because their job doesn't actually pay enough to put food on the table for their kids. You know, when you see that stuff, you don't forget it in a hurry. The problem is most people have not. And certainly most younger people have never come across any of this sort of stuff.
Sorry, I'm just going to, sorry to interrupt you there. I just wanted to make a really good point about this quickly. I'm the same as you. I'm very well traveled. I've been to 65 different countries, extensive travel. I have seen things that it's very difficult to put into words for a Westerner because, like, it's not in their realm of possibility. I went to Cuba in 2017 or 18, I can't remember, I think it was 17. And this is just as they were toying with taking off the embargo. And I had to fly from Tennessee down to Panama across to Havana. And for whatever reason, in my mind, I expected Havana to be somewhat romantic. I had this romantic notion of it. The reality is Cuba was hands down the most difficult country I've ever traveled to. It was a smack in the face. And I've been to Jordan, I've been to Syria, I've been to Egypt. I have experienced cultural shock, but I have never experienced that kind of shock. And things from the water stops running at 9 o'clock at night, so you can't flush the toilet, to, you know, when I was there, look, it could be different now. The internet was only available in 2 parts of Havana, and you had to go buy this like ticket thing, and you'd pull it open. It had a little code, and then it was like, I think $25 for like 10 megabytes. It was, and you had to stand like right near the tower. And so as someone who is as traveled as me, to go into a country like that where I can't use Google Maps, I can't sort of like, it was a real culture shock for me. And I remember thinking, I went into a bar and they had like Corona beer bottles, and because they can't make glasses, they can't import anything. So they had cut the beer bottle off, and the bottom of the beer bottle was now their glassware at the restaurant. They've repurposed everything, you know, all those beautiful vintage cars you see, they've got like a Kia driving wheel, because they have to make do. So the reason I bring that up is because I posted about that the other day, a couple of weeks ago, and people came for me in the comment section saying, I don't know what I'm talking about. How dare I make Cuba look poorer than it is? And I'm like, wait a minute.
I've been there.
I've actually been there. Like, these are my photos. I've physically put feet on the ground there. Have you? And I think that's where things are really alarming, because, you know, I already had a very broad worldview. Going to Cuba was another level for me, and I'm sure it was the same for you with Venezuela. It punches you in the face.
Look, it was interesting. I was already a libertarian long before I went to Venezuela. Going to Venezuela was very, very interesting to watch my wife go through that. So we went together to a friend's wedding, and I see the comment from GenGen077 saying, as a Venezuelan, thank you for speaking about us. I hope your family and everyone are okay. GenGen, I hope that's worked out well. But what I saw there really impacted me, but even more so impacted my wife. What a lot of people don't know about a place like Venezuela, it was once in the top 10 wealthiest countries on earth. They had a rubber boom. They've got precious stones. They've got emeralds and things in abundance. They've got salt. They've got a beautiful tropical growing climate, and they've got the world's largest proven oil reserves. More than Iran, more than Iraq, more than anywhere else in the world. They should be rolling in money. They should be like Dubai rich. Okay, and they're not. They used to be rich. So it wasn't socialism straight away. They've made a series of bad choices with regards to their governments, and sort of South American countries seem to be really good at going between a fascist dictator to a communist dictator and then somehow back again. They just have a really hard time stopping in between those two extremes. But they ended up with Chavez, and in my opinion, that's where things really went downhill. Now they are one of the poorest countries on earth. And being there is really jarring. So a place like Havana, you look and it's got these quaint buildings, and this is why people try and paint it. It's this lovely little charming place. You've got these quaint 2-story buildings with all the peeling paint and everything else, and the old cars and blah, blah, blah. Caracas is a very different story. You go there and the architecture tells you very clearly there was money here. There was money here. There were rich people here. The cultural scene is phenomenal. The food scene, if you go to the right places, is amazing. I sat in a jazz bar. Some of the most incredible live music I've ever heard was in a little bar in the basement of a building somewhere on the streets of Caracas. We were drinking $1.70 cocktails that were the size of a fish bowl and were strong. They were seriously alcoholic, listening to literally world-class musicians. But I ended up speaking to a guy. And if I could do one thing, it would be to transport absolutely everybody into this conversation just for a moment. Because this was the moment of that trip that changed my perspective. I ended up talking to an older gentleman there, and he spoke enough English that we were able to talk directly. And he shared with me what it was like for him as an older gentleman who tried to stop Hugo Chavez from getting in. And he tried to stop the socialists from taking over. He campaigned, he attended rallies, he tried to influence his friends, all of that. And he didn't succeed, right? Hugo Chavez won. And things have gone dramatically downhill from there, and now under Nicolas Maduro. And the pain in his eyes, as he said to me, I never made a plan to get my family out if we lost. And, he's growing old now, looking at his son, who's now an adult and has his own kids, and his grandkids. His grandchild, he said to me, is malnourished. cannot get basic medical care. And he's had to grow old watching that.
Mm.
Now, the thing that kills him is that he saw it coming.
Yeah.
And he never made a plan B.
Yeah.
Right? And I find myself sitting here looking at the direction that Australia is going in and very concerned.
Yeah, same.
That we are repeating the mistakes that others have made. And like that man, I will campaign. I will raise the alarm. I will speak up. I will do whatever I can. But you know what I will not do? I will not grow old stuck in this country. If the voters of this country choose to follow Venezuela, I will not grow old in this country watching my children suffer their bad choices.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where I'm at now. I am trying to raise the alarm and speak up and make as much noise as I can because I love this country and I would love to grow old here.
Yeah.
But if this country is so spoiled and so has been so spared from any hardship that we're going to go down this path and the majority of people think it's the right thing to do, then me and my family, we are packing bags and we're going.
And
I will not grow old. I will not be that man.
Yeah.
I will not be him.
And I think if you were to sort of survey the average Australian, they would agree with you on that. The issue is like, what do we do and where do we go and how do we manage? And I think
so. You're right. I never addressed that. Can I comment on that?
Please
And then I'll let you close. So there has for a long time been this dynamic in play that young people love socialism. And what keeps happening is the socialists and the lefties are kind of looking at it going, aha, the old people are all going to die out. All those old conservative fogies, they're going to die out and then we're going to dominate politics. And it never quite happens.
No.
And it's simply because the overwhelming majority of young people actually do have something of an epiphany at some point. For some people, it comes when they get their first paycheck and they see how much tax was taken out of it.
Mm-hmm.
For other people, it's when they try and actually, start a business or pursue other things, and they start to run into all these barriers, and then they start thinking back to all the conversations that they've had with all these idiots and out of touch people and blah, blah, blah. And they're like, oh, hang on, maybe actually they weren't as out of touch as I thought that they were.
Yeah.
So our job is to continue making the argument. And I mean, this is why I've ended up on Instagram. I'm not a technology person. I'm 39 going on 60 when it comes to technology, right? But if I'm going to be one of the people making these arguments, and I have been for 12 years now, mostly on Facebook and YouTube, but if I'm going to keep on making these arguments, then I need to reach as many people as I possibly can. Because the more young people, especially, that hear these arguments, they can hate my guts for all I care.
Yeah.
But in 2 years, in 5 years, in 10 years, life is going to kick them in the balls.
Yeah.
And their brain is going to go back to this crazy guy that they listen to and go, fuck, maybe he had a point.
Yeah. And that's my worst fear.
Yeah.
Hindsight is a terrible thing, realistically. And I agree with you on that. And having felt the full weight of the backlash, my sort of premise moving forward is, well, you've done your worst. You've shot off all your cannons. You've thrown all your bullets at me. You guys have run out of ammunition. I'm ready to go. I've never been afraid to go against the grain. And I think that for the most part is why I polarize a lot of people, because I'm not afraid to have those very difficult discussions. And I also have no issue saying how I feel. And I think for the most part, a lot of people are scared because they need to know that someone will agree with them. And I think that social media is only exacerbating that. And particularly when we talk about our youngsters, having been young once myself, I know what it's like to want all your peers to be on your side. And I can only imagine that if you were to have this like fake audience on Instagram or TikTok or wherever they are, you would also want them to like you. You want to do things that makes them stay on board. As I've gotten older, and I think this is just an age thing, I'm 35 and I feel like I'm going on 50. My friendships groups have definitely changed. I have lost a lot of friends, and I don't want to be nasty here, but a lot of the backlash came from people who I had actually cut out of my life because I had realized that I've grown, I've changed and evolved as a person, and I no longer sort of relate down there. And I think you're right. There's a rite of passage where all of a sudden things start to become very real, and you start to go, hang on a minute, this like hedonistic lifestyle I lived when I was 22 is not fulfilling. It's exhausting. I'm not getting anywhere. And it's a skip and a jump between 22 and 35. Like in my head, I'm still a baby, but reality is time goes fast.
Let me add to that.
Yeah.
The other thing that happens is you realize that the things that worked in theory when your university professor read them out of a textbook aren't working in practice as you try and actually navigate real life. I think that's the other big thing that happens. A lot of people are getting their Marxist indoctrination from their school teachers, their high school teachers, their university teachers,
Yeah.
and then they get out into the real world and wonder, why is this so hard? It must be the patriarchy, it must be capitalism, they're oppressing me. And then slowly a percentage of them start to go, hang on, maybe everything that I was told was wrong, and all those years where it might have actually been wasted.
Absolutely. And I have found that to be true, particularly in business. Obviously, you learn things very difficult that, you know, you learn them the hard way. And, you know, and this is the thing that really frustrates me about the general conversation. Because as you said, in the list of needs, small business people are literally at the bottom. We're like, how do we feed our families next week?
How do we survive? Yeah.
You know, and we've been down there for the better part of 12 months. Everyone else is like slowly catching up to us. So, you know, when I've got like some professional academic or lifetime academic telling me how to think and feel when my lived experience is completely different, I get outraged. And I think that's what makes me jump onto Instagram and put out videos. But my issue with what's going on now is, given that there's like a time delay of suffering, like we're already farther along, and these people who are now starting to feel their rights being impinged by not being able to take the children to the local park. How much longer do we give it for these people to catch up, or can they catch up? You know, I don't know.
The truth has a way of winning in the end. This is one of my mantras, right? The truth has a way of winning in the end. It sucks to be right early, right? It sucks to be one of the people that figures something out early when everyone else is still wrong. The very first protest that I spoke, yeah, you and me both. The very first protest that I spoke at was on Anzac Day 2020, so April 25th, 2020. And I was faced with a situation there where only 70 people showed up. We had a ton of cops there, and I received a deluge of hate, not on the same level as what you received after they went after you, but certainly the most aggressive deluge of hate that I've ever received. Since then, I've continued speaking at the protests, and they've grown to 10,000 people. And you know how many negative messages I get now?
Very few.
Zero.
Yeah. Yeah.
The last two protests that I've attended, I've live streamed from them, gotten tens of thousands of views, if not hundreds of thousands of views on the live streams. I've spoken, my face is out there, my name is out there, people know who I am, they know where to find me. Not one person has come crawling out of the gutter to try and attack me.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is a measure of just how many people are shifting now.
Yeah.
And if this process, where the government has taken total control of our lives, doesn't wake people up, nothing will. Now, some people will take longer than others, but ultimately, I'm actually really quite optimistic that there's going to be a huge silver lining out of all of this, where so many people who have previously always supported the government knows what it's doing, they've got our best interests at heart, that kind of attitude, which I was raised with, by the way. And I know a lot of people who still hold that view, but a lot of people are getting shaken out of that, and they're realizing what I would say is the core lesson in all of this.
Yeah.
A government with the power to give you everything you want has the power to take everything you have.
Yeah.
Right? And if you want that socialist daddy government that can look after you, then you're also going to be faced with that all-powerful government that can take everything from you. You can't choose one and not have the other. Yeah. That's the lesson that I think a lot of people are waking up to now.
I agree. And I think that given the I want to not say radicalist again, but that kind of seems to be the word that keeps coming up for me, but given that there is that massive divide and, you know, there's the two camps, I would like to think that there's a place for people like yourself and me to be that common ground, that middle ground, that common sense argument. Because, you know, I don't want people to die. You know, I've got friends who are immune compromised and I care about them deeply. You know, I've got a foot in both camps, but I'm also very, like, concerned about, you know, what the prevention's worse than the cure at this point. So I guess moving forward, if we can encourage people to feel safe, to just have these discussions without the polarizing arguments, without demanding to know where someone stands. And, you know, guys, we'll wrap it up because we'll do more of these, I promise you. I appreciate so many people have stayed for the whole chat. I think where we need to go from here is to, and it's hard, like, you know, we're all human. And let me tell you, no girl more on this planet right now wants to rage and say her truth. But the truth will come out eventually. And if I've learned anything, that when you go in too hard and you try and chastise people into understanding you and believing you, they are more likely to repel. Our government is now experiencing that firsthand. So I would like to position yourself and me, Emily from Voice for Victoria, people like Matt from Discernible, as just common sense people having common sense discussions. I'm not going to go and say I'm anti this or I'm pro that. I'm just literally in that middle ground trying to figure out the way through this. And I think that's how we change the political landscape.
And it's just each of us doing our own little bit.
Yeah.
That's all it is. Just actually having the conversations and being the adult in the room, even if other people aren't willing to be, actually just being the adult in the room and making a space where it's possible for those conversations to take place. Whether they do or don't is often up to the other person, whether they're going to participate in that. But making a space where it's possible, where that can actually happen.
I agree.
So that's, I think, what our task is ahead of us. And it's going to be a long, slow and thankless one. But if I'm going to grow old in this country, then some things are going to have to change between now and then.
I agree. And that's how I feel, you know, this is the hill I'm happy to die on. And, you know, I said it before that we lack leadership in this country, and we have for a long time. And we've seen that in the way our leaders get booted out by their own party and there's a massive turnover. Was it been like 10 years since we've had a consistent prime minister? Scobo's probably the closest at this point, is he?
Well, 2007 we had Rudd, and then he got knifed for Gillard and she got knifed for Rudd, and then we had Turnbull and Abbott in sort of quick succession, and now we've ended up with ScoMo, who I think has had the longest run out of all of them, and I might have even missed one in there somewhere as well. It's been a mess.
Yeah.
It's been an absolute mess, and unfortunately we are seeing the results of that.
Yeah, I believe so too. And I think that the issue with leadership is it can't be populist. You know, a leader stands firm, they have conviction, and they will die, fall on their sword. And that's something that I bring to be true. And I'm a bit like you. Like, I grew up in a conservative household where hard work got us where we needed to go. Like, we didn't get handouts. We didn't get, ribbons for participation. You know, first was best. And I think that's why I struggle in today's world, because that's how I am, and that's how you find success. That's how you grow. That's how you evolve as a person. And this space at the moment seems to keep people really low down in emotional intelligence, general intelligence. You know, it's almost like we want to keep people disenfranchised so that they just blindly accept what they're told. But moving forward, because I feel like we could chat for hours. I think our next conversation, when you've got time, and because I know a lot of people want to see this, is what do we do now that we're becoming politically active? You know, given that you and I are both identifying as libertarian, I know there's the two-party system is an issue. So maybe we can really dedicate time for that. And guys, feel free to DM both me and Topher in the meantime. I think that's something that will be the focus coming into the November 2020 election.
Well, the November 22 is the next state election in Victoria, but we've got a federal election coming up between March and May. And so that's really got to be, we need to be improving people's political intelligence. Not that everyone needs to become a political junkie, but actually understand the basics of how this works and the basics of what you and I can do to ever so slightly help the chance that there is actually going to be a change. But that's probably a topic for another time. I can hear I've got a screaming baby in the other room that I'm supposed to be heading into to help out with. So I'm going to have to call time on this particular chat, but I've absolutely loved it. It's been such a pleasure, and I'm definitely up for having more as soon as we can make our schedules work.
Absolutely. And thanks everyone for tuning in. I think we had over like 180 for most of that conversation. I'll save it to our IGTVs, and Topher will upload it on his, and we'll have more of these discussions. And between myself, Topher, and a few other people, guys, there are plenty of people out there who do want to have discussions. Maybe they're not very public right now, but don't feel alone in your thoughts. You're not.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I'm going to sign off.
Thanks. See ya.
Thanks, Carly.
Thanks, guys. I'm going to save this to my IGTV. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.